The moment I saw Alexander's arrogant smirk disappear, and the laughter around the dinner table freeze into an icy hush, I realized something powerful. Nothing tastes sweeter than watching a narcissistic, cheating husband choke on his own arrogance. This wasn't just a dinner. It was the moment my revenge became real. The moment the man who spent years making me feel small and unwanted finally saw the truth, I was never the one who needed to beg for love. I was the prize he lost forever. My name is Rachel Thompson, and I'm 35 years old. And that was the night I stopped being the woman he settled for, and became the woman he would regret losing for the rest of his miserable, hollow life. I used to think love was enough. That if you gave everything, your loyalty, your warmth, your patience, the man you married would cherish you in return. But Alexender was never that man. For 10 years, I watched him measure me against ghosts of his past. He'd tell me about the girls who used to worship him, how women would throw themselves at him, and how he gave all that up because God told him to settle down. Settle down, he'd say, while his eyes glazed over me like I was a piece of furniture that came with the house. The worst part wasn't even the women he kept in contact with under the guise of business. It was the way he made me feel for questioning him. Like I was small. Like I was insecure. Like I should be thankful he chose me at all. I tried, God knows I tried, to be the understanding wife. To forgive the late-night client calls that came with soft giggles on the other end. To ignore the smell of perfume that wasn't mine on his shirts. To look past the constant texting, the sudden bathroom trips, the deleted messages. But each time I confronted him, I got the same cold, dismissive smirk. Relax, Rachel. You're overthinking. It's just business. You're lucky I'm here at all. One night, after I found a lipstick-stained receipt for a dinner for two, I locked myself in the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red, swollen from crying. I remember whispering, "Is this who you want to be for the rest of your life?" Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a breakdown. It was a quiet decision. If Alexender thought he settled for me, I was going to show him exactly what that meant. The next morning, I started planning. I got a private therapist, the kind who wasn't afraid to tell me hard truths and help me dig out the parts of myself I'd buried under years of walking on eggshells. I quietly enrolled in online business courses at night while he snored beside me. I opened a business account in my name and started freelance design work, stashing away every dollar I could. I even got legal advice from a lawyer I met in a women's networking group, quietly, carefully, learning what I needed to know. All while playing the same quiet, compliant wife he thought he had on a leash. He had no idea that while he was bragging about the women who would have killed to be with him, the woman he actually married was outgrowing him with every passing day. Then came the night of the dinner party. We had a few couples over. Wine was flowing, laughter was echoing through the house, and I was playing hostess, refilling drinks, serving food, wearing the smile he expected me to wear. And then, in front of everyone, he leaned back in his chair, smirked, and said, "You'll know, I could have had better, but I chose Rachel because God told me she needed me." The laughter that followed was hesitant, awkward. They didn't know whether to laugh with him or look away. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I walked back into the kitchen, pulled out the folder I had prepared weeks earlier, and walked right back into the dining room. And with the calmest smile I'd ever worn in my life, I laid the divorce papers in front of him. "Since you chose me out of charity, Alexender," I said softly, "let me free you so you can find the better you deserve." The room fell dead silent. His eyes darted from the papers to my face, and for the first time in a decade, I saw fear flicker across his perfect facade. "And just so you're not confused," I continued, pulling out a stack of printed screenshots, "here's what your business looked like." One by one, I dropped screenshots of his flirty messages with all his talking stages across the table. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. And then, the cherry on top. "You remember that refinancing application you signed a few months ago?" I said. "That wasn't refinancing. You signed over your rights to this house. It's mine now." He looked like he had been punched in the gut. And I just stood there, steady, calm, while the room watched him crumble under the weight of his own arrogance. Alexender moved out that week, trying to save face by telling people it was mutual, that we needed time apart. But the truth was, he was exposed. I changed the locks. I got the utilities and mortgage under my name. I moved forward with the divorce without looking back. And the business I started quietly? It took off. Within 6 months, I was making enough to pay the mortgage comfortably while growing my savings. I went from being the woman who begged for his affection to being the woman who didn't need him for a single thing. He tried to reach out. Tried to talk. Sent long, self-pitying emails about how he still loved me, how no one understood him like I did, how he would change. I ignored every single one. And then, the part that changed everything. I was sitting in my home office, late at night, reviewing a client's website redesign when I found a handwritten note in the back of my drawer. It was from me, 2 years before everything fell apart. It said, "Dear Rachel, if you ever find this, I hope you have remembered your worth. I hope you're living without fear, without begging for love, without shrinking yourself to keep a man comfortable." I sat there, letting the words sink in, tears running down my cheeks, not from sadness, but from gratitude to the woman I used to be, who refused to let me forget who I was. I looked around the house I now owned, the business I built, the life I reclaimed. And I realized. I wasn't the woman he settled for. I was the woman who rose, quietly, while he was too busy chasing shadows to notice the storm gathering right under his nose. That night, as I watered the plants in the backyard, I caught a glimpse of him parked across the street, watching the house with that same pathetic longing in his eyes. I didn't wave. I didn't go outside to confront him. I just smiled, turned around, and walked back into my house, closing the door gently behind me. Because tomorrow, he would learn that losing me was only the beginning of his regret. And for me? Tomorrow was the day I was finally ready to show the world just how powerful a woman can become once she stops asking for permission. I thought serving him divorce papers in front of our friends would be the end of it. It wasn't. It was only the beginning of him realizing he had lost the best thing he never deserved. The house was quiet after he left. Not the kind of quiet that feels empty, but the kind that feels like a wound finally breathing. For the first time in years, I could sit in the living room without the tension of waiting for his car lights to hit the driveway, wondering what mood he'd walk in with that day. I kept the curtains open, letting sunlight fill the rooms he used to darken with his presence. I lit candles that smelled like lavender and eucalyptus, scents I loved but he once called annoying. I turned on soft jazz while cooking, something he used to complain made me too soft. Everything he used to criticize became part of my healing. He tried to crawl back, of course. The flowers he left on the porch wilted untouched. The emails telling me he still loved me and wanted to work on us sat unread. The pity party he threw for himself to mutual friends, saying I had tricked him into signing away the house, that I was unstable, was just another attempt to rewrite the story. The old me would have cared. The new me was too busy reclaiming my life. Every morning, I made coffee in my kitchen, the house I now owned in my name, and sat at the table to map out client projects for my growing business. I took on branding jobs, website redesigns, social media packages, each invoice I sent, a quiet step toward independence. Money started flowing in, and so did confidence. I upgraded my workspace, turning the guest room into a home office with a clean white desk, a pinboard with affirmations, and a small plant that leaned toward the window's morning light. I signed contracts with clients who respected my work, not just because I was good at what I did but because I believed I was good at what I did. That belief was something he could never take from me again. One day, while shopping for groceries, I saw him at the end of an aisle. He looked older, like the bitterness was aging him from the inside. His eyes found mine, and for a split second, he tried to muster that old smirk. I pushed my cart past him without a word, and the power in that small moment was something I had never felt with him before. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to defend my choices. My silence was my freedom. The rumors didn't stop, though. I heard whispers through mutual acquaintances about how he was telling people I ruined his life, how he gave up everything for me. Some of the people we once shared Sunday lunches with started to look at me differently, their eyes carrying questions they were too polite to ask. I could have hidden, but I chose to live louder instead. I hosted a small dinner for a few women I met at a local business networking event. We shared stories of what we had survived, cheating, control, gaslighting, and how we were building lives we loved. We laughed so hard that night the neighbors probably heard us, but I didn't care. The house that had once felt like a cage became a sanctuary of laughter, healing, and new beginnings. A few weeks later, I found out he was telling people I had manipulated him into signing the house over. That I was cold, heartless, a snake. I didn't yell, cry, or call him to fight. I gathered every screenshot, email, and voice memo proving his affairs, his drinking, his emotional abuse, and how he willingly signed the papers. I saved them in a neatly labeled folder on my computer. If he wanted a war, I would let him destroy himself with the truth. The final shift came when I posted a public message on my business page. I didn't share every detail, but I shared enough. I was a woman who left a toxic marriage, built her own business, and found freedom in herself. I made it clear I would no longer shrink to make others comfortable with my healing. Support poured in, clients, new connections, women who had watched me from afar. The fear I once had of being alone was replaced with a quiet confidence that I was, in fact, never alone. The right people found me when I stopped hiding. I started doing small things for myself again. Yoga in the morning before emails. Evening walks without checking the time. Traveling for weekend getaways, taking pictures of sunsets that made me feel alive. Cooking meals that were too spicy for his taste, dancing barefoot in the kitchen while the sauce simmered. Each moment was a gentle reminder that I was no longer living a life I needed to be rescued from. One evening, I stepped out onto my porch with a cup of tea, breathing in the cool air as the neighborhood lights flickered on. I felt calm, grateful, whole. Then, across the street, I saw a moving truck. I didn't pay much attention at first, but when the movers left and the last of the boxes disappeared inside, I froze. There he was, standing in the driveway, looking directly at me. Alexender. Moving into the house across the street. The man who said he settled for me, the man who lost me, the man who tried to ruin my peace. Now living directly across from the life I built without him. He didn't wave. I didn't either. I stood there, lifting my tea calmly to my lips, letting the silence speak for me. Because what he didn't know was that the woman he thought he could intimidate, control, and humiliate was gone forever. And as the porch light above me flickered on, I turned and walked back inside, closing the door softly behind me. The first few days of him living across the street were quiet. Too quiet. I saw him watching me from his porch while pretending to scroll on his phone, pacing like a restless animal in a cage he built for himself. Every time I stepped outside to water the plants, walk to my car, or take out the trash, I felt his eyes on me. But I refused to give him the satisfaction of acknowledging him. I kept living. I took morning runs in my new bright workout clothes, earbuds in, head high, letting the cold air bite my cheeks, reminding me I was alive. I sat on the porch in the evenings, reading business books and sipping tea, refusing to close the curtains like I used to when I was afraid of upsetting him. At night, while cooking, I would catch glimpses of him through the kitchen window, lights from his new house spilling across the driveway, highlighting the way he stood there, staring. Let him watch. Because the woman he thought he could control was never coming back. At first, he tried small, pathetic tactics. Leaving trash cans slightly tipped over near my driveway, like I wouldn't notice. Parking his car just close enough to the edge of his property line to make a point. Letting his music blast during the exact hours he knew I was having Zoom meetings with clients. But I refused to react. I simply pushed the trash cans back, parked my car with precision, and kept my meetings going, unbothered, my voice confident and clear as I signed new clients, closed deals, and grew the business he once mocked as a hobby. Then, he tried to be friendly. Morning, Rachel, he called once, waving stiffly as I pulled weeds from the flower bed. I glanced up, gave him a polite nod, and returned to my task without a word. The fake smile dropped from his face almost immediately, and he turned away, shoulders tight, unable to handle the reality that I owed him nothing. The rumors started again. I heard he was telling neighbors that I was bitter, that I ruined him, that I wasn't letting him move on. The same neighbors who once bought into his charm now saw him pacing alone on his porch at night, saw the way I carried myself without fear, without apology. They didn't believe him anymore. I could tell by the way they greeted me warmly during my morning runs, the way they waved when I returned from errands, the way their eyes softened when they saw me laughing with friends on my porch. He was alone in his lies. And he couldn't stand it. One Saturday, I decided to host a small brunch for my women's business circle. We sat up on the porch with mimosas, fresh fruit, and pastries, laughing about contracts, clients, and the dreams we were building. I saw him watching from across the street, standing in his window, arms crossed, bitterness etched into every line on his face. I didn't care. I raised my glass in a toast with the women who became my sisters in this new chapter of life. To growth, to freedom, to choosing ourselves, I said. They cheered, and we clinked glasses, letting our laughter float across the street like a quiet rebellion. But it wasn't enough for him to watch. The next week, I found him standing at the edge of my driveway while I was getting the mail. "You think you're better than me now?" he said, his voice low. I looked at him calmly. "I don't think about you at all." His jaw tightened, but I turned and walked back inside, closing the door behind me. That night, I walked around the house, locking doors and checking windows, not out of fear, but out of habit. As I moved through the living room, I caught my reflection in the glass, a woman standing tall in her own home, unafraid, unbroken. I turned off the lights, letting the moonlight fill the room, and lay in bed, letting the silence remind me how far I had come. But the next morning, I found muddy footprints near my back porch. They weren't there the night before. I stood there, looking at them, the cold air biting at my bare feet, letting the reality sink in. He was pushing boundaries. Testing how far he could go. I cleaned the footprints away and installed security cameras around the house, quietly, without fanfare, without fear. If he wanted to play games, I would be ready, but on my terms. I went about my day, attending meetings, working on designs, cooking dinner while music played softly in the background. At night, I checked the camera feeds, watching him pace in front of his house, looking at mine, hands in his pockets, restless. Days passed, and the cameras caught him wandering near the edge of my lawn at odd hours. Sometimes he would just stand there, staring, before turning back to his porch, his posture sagging under the weight of his own desperation. And every morning, I woke up stronger, clearer, more ready to protect the life I had built. One evening, I decided to go for a walk around the neighborhood just before sunset. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, the air warm against my skin. As I turned the corner back onto my street, I saw him again, standing in his driveway, watching me. This time, I didn't look away. I kept my eyes on him as I walked up my driveway, letting him see the steady strength in my gaze. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and closed it gently, the sound final, like a promise to myself. Later that night, I stood at the window, looking out across the street, the glow from his living room spilling onto the porch. He was sitting on the steps, head in his hands, rocking slightly, alone. And I felt nothing. No pity. No fear. No anger. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing he was exactly where he chose to be. I turned away from the window, exhaling, letting the silence fill the room like a warm blanket. I was ready to sleep, ready for tomorrow, ready for everything this new life had waiting for me. But as I stepped into the hallway, I paused, noticing something out of place on the floor near the front door. It was a single, fresh footprint. Inside. Leading away from the door. I stood there, breath steady, letting the weight of that moment settle over me. The single footprint on my hallway floor stared back at me like a warning. For a moment, I stood frozen, the quiet of the house pressing against my ears. But fear didn't come. Instead, a slow, cold determination settled over me, like a blade being sharpened in the dark. He had crossed the line. And now, it was time to end this once and for all. I followed the footprint, careful not to smudge it, my eyes scanning the locks, the windows, the rooms. Nothing else was out of place, but that didn't matter. The message was clear, he wanted me to know he could get in. But he was wrong about what that would do to me. He thought it would make me crumble, retreat, beg for peace. Instead, it lit the fire I had been holding back for too long. The next morning, I contacted the police, filing a report and submitting the security footage I had saved, including the videos of him pacing near the property, lingering by the windows, and now, this footprint inside my home. The officers were calm but firm. They took it seriously. They told me they would increase patrols in the area and encouraged me to get a restraining order. I filed immediately. As I left the station, the summer sun warm on my face, I felt the fear drain from my body, replaced with a fierce clarity. This wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about showing him that his reign over my life was over. That evening, I sat down with my laptop and opened the folder I had built over the last year. Every screenshot of his infidelities. Every voicemail where he cursed and gaslighted me. Every email where he admitted to making mistakes. Financial documents showing the timeline of his lies. Screenshots of the women he had been with while I cooked him dinner and folded his laundry, his words to them dripping with the false charm I had once fallen for. And the final piece, the police report and security footage showing his stalking behavior. I compiled everything into a clean, factual timeline, attaching evidence to each point, labeling everything meticulously. This was not going to be an emotional outburst. This was going to be a reckoning. The next day, I reached out to our old church community and a few of the neighborhood groups we had once been a part of. These were people he was still trying to manipulate with his pity stories, claiming I had ruined him, that he was trying to move on while I was bitter. They needed to know the truth. I asked them to meet for a conversation at a local cafe, letting them know I wanted to clear the air, calmly, respectfully. When I walked in, heads turned. I was wearing a simple blue dress, my hair down, my posture steady. I carried my laptop and a small notebook, nothing else. The room was quiet as I sat down with them. Some of them looked uncomfortable, others curious, some wary. I took a breath. Thank you for meeting me. I know you've heard a lot about me from Alexender. I just want you to have the truth so you can decide what to believe. I opened my laptop, turning it toward them, and walked them through the timeline. No dramatics. Just facts. His affairs, the screenshots, the financial documents, the recordings of him degrading me, the way he signed the house over willingly during his drunken rants about refinancing, the security footage of him stalking my property, the police report. I could see the color draining from their faces as they read the messages, heard his voice cursing me, saw the evidence for themselves. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I let the truth do what it does best, shatter illusions. When I finished, the room was silent. One of the older women who had once told me I was lucky to have such a God-fearing husband wiped tears from her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Rachel," she whispered. Others nodded, unable to meet my eyes, ashamed of how quickly they had believed him. I closed my laptop, standing. "I don't need you to take sides," I said calmly. "I just need you to know the truth. I'm done hiding." And with that, I left. Word spread quickly, not because I gossiped, but because the truth has a way of moving faster than lies when it's given room to breathe. I heard he tried to deny it at first, calling it fake, saying I had manipulated the screenshots. But the evidence was too clear, too undeniable. The women he had flirted with, the ones he thought would keep his secrets, came forward, embarrassed, ashamed, confirming it was all real. His carefully crafted persona fell apart, piece by piece, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Meanwhile, I kept building my life. Clients continued to sign on, impressed by my professionalism and creativity. My business expanded, allowing me to hire 2 part-time assistants to handle admin work. I started hosting workshops for women wanting to start their businesses, sharing not just skills but the strength I had gained through survival. I traveled, taking a trip to the mountains alone, waking up before dawn to watch the sunrise, letting the cold wind fill my lungs, reminding me that I was alive, free, unbroken. At night, I came home to my house, lighting candles, cooking meals that nourished my body, playing music I loved, dancing barefoot in the kitchen. The silence was no longer heavy. It was holy. One evening, I was walking to my car when I saw him standing on his porch, watching me, looking like a ghost of the man he once pretended to be. He looked tired, drained, the weight of exposure heavy on his shoulders. He opened his mouth, as if to say something, but I simply looked at him, my face calm, my eyes steady, and shook my head once, softly. Then I got into my car and drove away. There was nothing left to say. Weeks later, I received notice from the police that he had violated the restraining order by stepping onto my property again. They arrested him quietly, the patrol car lights reflecting in his windows as neighbors watched from their porches. He was charged with trespassing and harassment, and I pressed charges, refusing to drop them despite his attempts to send apologies through mutual acquaintances. I'm done protecting him from himself, I told them. He needs to face the consequences of what he's done. And he did. The day of the court hearing, I stood in the hallway outside the courtroom, my lawyer by my side, breathing steadily as he was led past me in handcuffs. His eyes found mine, pleading, broken. And I felt nothing. No pity. No fear. Only peace. Inside the courtroom, the judge listened to the evidence, my security footage, the police reports, the restraining order violations, the recordings of him threatening me during his drunken rants. The judge granted a permanent restraining order, and he was sentenced to probation, required to attend counseling, and barred from coming within 500 feet of me or my property. When it was over, I walked out of the courthouse into the bright sunlight, breathing in the air like it was the first breath of my new life. Because it was. I celebrated that night with the women who had stood by me, my business circle, a few new friends, and even some of the old neighbors who had apologized for believing his lies. We sat around my dining table, the table that had once felt like a place of silent fear, now filled with laughter, stories, and clinking glasses. To Rachel, one of them said, raising her glass, for teaching us what it looks like to take your power back. I raised my glass too, smiling. To every woman who refuses to stay small for someone else's comfort, I said. We drank, we laughed, we celebrated. As the night grew quiet and everyone left, I stood on my porch, looking out at the dark, empty street. His house was dark, empty now, sold off to cover debts and legal fees. He had moved away, unable to stay in a neighborhood that now saw him for who he truly was. The breeze was soft, carrying the scent of the night air, the rustle of leaves a gentle reminder that life moves on, that healing comes, that freedom is possible. I closed my eyes, letting the peace of that moment sink in. This was my revenge. Not bitterness. Not hatred. Not screaming matches or tears. But building a life so beautiful, so full, so mine, that there was no room left for him in it. His punishment was watching the woman he tried to break become the woman he could never have, never control, never dim again. And me? I was free. This is the end of my story. A story of a woman who was once told she was settled for, who discovered she was never the burden, she was the blessing he was too blind to cherish. A woman who stopped asking for love from someone who did not know how to give it. A woman who took back her power, her peace, her purpose. A woman who burned down every lie built around her and rose from the ashes, stronger, clearer, and fully, fiercely alive. Thank you for spending your time with my story. Feel free to share your thoughts or reactions in the comments, I'd love to hear from you.